right, kia ora everyone, and welcome to episode number 1 of Digital Footprints, a podcast by BIMinNZ. I'm your host, Jake Nash, and Digital Footprints is all about the human stories behind the amazing people in the BIM, digital engineering, and construction innovation community right here in Aotearoa. For our maiden voyage, I have an absolutely fantastic guest for you today. He is a friend, he's a former colleague and a mentor, and he's absolutely fundamental to BIMinNZ. Not just the group, but the sheer notion of bringing BIM to Aotearoa. He is the Chief Innovation Officer at Revizto, and his name's Jason Howden. In this episode, Jason talks all about his 3 decades in the industry, from his early days studying, to his early work, to moving overseas and experiencing global projects, eventually moving back to New Zealand and playing a fundamental role during one of Aotearoa's most fundamental moments in construction with the Christchurch rebuild, and ultimately to where he is now, seeing the world of global BIM once again through Revizto. We're really lucky to have Jason's time, and I really enjoyed talking to him. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Cheers, everyone.
Cool.
Cool.
Yeah, finally home. And it's good to be home and surrounded by family. I got 2 young nieces. They think I'm the coolest uncle in the world because I travel the world.
Yeah. And just back from London, if I'm correct?
Just back from London. We had our what we call our commercial kickoff. So we all did it together in London, which was really awesome to have the whole commercial team together in one location. And then I stayed a week longer to go and visit key clients in Germany and around the UK, which was it was good to share knowledge from the other side of the world with them. A lot of clients, a lot of customers are keen to understand what's going on down under. I think something that I've often promoted when I've talked down under, we tend to be very innovative, leading the field. But I think we surround ourselves with that, so we take it for granted. We don't realize how innovative and leading the field we are in this industry. And when you go to the other side of the world, they're kind of like, what's happening? Tell us what you're doing down there. And you start to explain what you're doing. And they're like, wow, that's so far ahead. And you're kind of like, oh, this is a bit of a juxtaposition because a lot of the guidelines, a lot of the standards come from that part of the world, and we're adopting them and implementing them in real life. Whereas in the larger economies, larger complex projects, there's a flywheel spooling up that's required. So they might have written the theory, but they're not necessarily practicing the theory.
Yeah, God, that must be so interesting to see and hear. Because yeah, you think, I mean, we've worked together, so I'm confident that we're doing pretty well. But you do kind of compare yourselves to overseas and think places like Norway and the UK, and wonder how different it must be over there, how much more advanced it must be over there for someone like me that's never been there. You gotta have this idea in your head that it must be so futuristic and they must be doing all this amazing stuff, and it's probably quite grounding to actually come back and go, no, we're doing all right here.
Yeah, and I've pondered it a lot in the last couple of years since I've been at Revizto and seen firsthand the transition. You know, it was many years ago, a couple of decades when I last worked in the UK, and that was quite mind-blowing, groundbreaking for me, because it did feel like I'd gone back 5 years in terms of the CAD adoption back then. And I couldn't understand why it was so much in its kind of infancy. And then I started to realize that the scale of these economies, when you're 5 million people, when you're a team of 5 million people, everybody knows everybody and you can kind of move forward at the same pace. But when you're a team of 70 million or 100 million or 300 million or 400 million, that's a different ballgame. And you do get these pockets of innovation. So don't get me wrong, there's lots of innovation on the other side of the world. But I guess what I'm talking about is a nation that is innovative and running at the same pace. And when I mean a nation, I really do mean the 2 nations. It's ANZ, it's Australia and New Zealand. You know, we might be adversaries on the rugby field, but when it comes to construction, we share a lot of talent, a lot of ideas, and we tend to move forward at the same pace, which is unique and special. I haven't seen that in other parts of the world. Central Europe has its own challenge. There's a lot of countries there, a lot of languages, a lot of cultures, all mashed together in a place much smaller than Australia. So that creates its own complexity. And that has been mind-blowing being in this job and understanding that kind of complexity of language, culture, and those barriers. Down under, we have culture, but we're all the same people. Doesn't matter if you're in Australia or New Zealand, we're the same people, love the same thing. You go to the beach, you go to the lakes, happy days.
Yeah. Hey, well, look, and I know you're probably really busy with planning Rev Up as well, which is just around the corner. So I'm keen to hear about that a little bit later. But thank you for taking the time.
Pleasure.
This is really exciting, and you're episode 1. So I can't think of a better person to have to kick this off. So I'm really thankful for the time. The whole idea about this podcast is it's sort of the human stories behind the people within our community. So I'm keen to really go back and talk about your journey to where you are now. But I think first of all, if there's anyone out there who doesn't know who you are, why don't you kick off by just telling us who is Jason Howden and what do you do? What does a day look like in your world?
Crikey. A day in my world today is quite unique. So, yes, I'm Jason Howden. I'm Chief Innovation Officer at Revizto. It's an interesting role at Revizto. I get asked a lot, what is Chief Innovation Officer? And I think a lot of it comes down to being a lighthouse for our own innovation as a tech company. So reaching beyond where we are in the day-to-day and thinking about where could Revizto go beyond tomorrow and then the next step. That's kind of my mandate from Armin, our founder. And we're quite in sync in terms of the alignment. Our passions are about trying to transform the construction industry. And, there's a quote, there's a beautiful quote about passionate small groups of people are the only ones that make change on the world. And there's another beautiful quote around those that think they can change the world often end up changing the world. And I think that's where Armin and I are 100% aligned, is we want to better the construction industry. It's a diverse, complicated industry that relies heavily on collaboration to get a project realized. And it's not lost on me in my it's actually 3 decades, just over, of being in the industry, driving digital transformation and change on, there's a couple of continents and multiple countries across multiple projects at various scales. It's always the same thing. And it's about people coming together, understanding the common goal and delivery of the project, and then delivering on that project. And it's been a wild ride from the early days of growing up in Gore, South Island of New Zealand. Even if you Google it, I don't even know if it comes up. It's that small. But, Dad was a builder. He helped direct the big fish, the gold guitar, the sheep, and the clock tower. And built KFC in Gore. So I've been around construction all my entire life. And, I look to Dad and, that's what's driven me around passion for construction. And he came home one day with a computer and said, "Hey, got a computer, you figure it out." And I was like, okay, plug this in, plug that in. That plug kind of fits there. Didn't know anything about computers. Pushed the button that looked like a power button in a Word, and DOS came up, and eventually found my way into AutoSketch and opened up the space shuttle and was like, wow, this is amazing. This is what I want to do in my life. And that was probably the, mid 80s, late.
Yeah, I remember DOS.
And that's been the wild ride ever since. I trained in Otago, in Dunedin, my first job really kind of kickstarted me into this career of digital transformation. I took the role from my tutor at Aotearoa Polytech. So I took his job at the architecture firm and then started to lead the digital and build upon that. And then some people from the studio, they went overseas to London. I was like, oh, that might be cool. And true story, my cat died. So that freed up the I can leave town because I didn't have a thing to look after. So I went to London and started doing some big projects, big hospitals, hospitals that felt bigger than Dunedin as a city, and watched the millennium come in. Worked in the IT department, worked in the visualization department, had a hand in every kind of digital facet of the studio, and then kind of built on top of that. But one of the things that really struck me was meeting a guy called Mervyn Richards. He's Sir Mervyn Richards now because of his impact on the construction industry. And he had this concept. He was leading Terminal 5 at Heathrow, and he worked for Lang O'Rourke. And we were doing hospitals with Lang O'Rourke. And he had a concept of a single model environment. And when I saw it and he described it to me, I was like, oh, that is genius. It was all the information was shared around a common digital environment. It was all in AutoCAD. It was all 2D. It was some very, basic kind of 3D stuff, but it was this concept of never duplicating information. I would draw a beam if I was a structural engineer, and that was shared. And I thought, that's brilliant. And when I came back to New Zealand in the early 2000s, I kind of brought that with me. And then, BIM emerged, Revit emerged, jumped into that and applied this concept of a single model environment with a better tool with Revit. And I guess the rest is history. I started to create my own apps in Revit. I started to the Rugwell, the Revit user group in Wellington, and just kind of, incentivizing people to think a different way of doing what we do in construction, because I find it exciting. Like you get to prototype the building before you build the building. And that's really cool, because at that point you can test things and you can try things, and you can look out the window. I remember a project in my early career where I modeled it all on 3D Studio Max, and the client wanted to see from their kitchen across their landscape of Canterbury what their view was going to be like. And I modeled all of that, and this would be, I don't know, mid-90s. And they just were blown away by the fact you could stand in your kitchen and this was the window and this is kind of the view. And I just find that really empowering for our industry.
Yeah. So 3 decades, that's a while. I'm sure you got a few more in you, but let's go back to decade 1, because I'm keen to explore all that you've just talked about in a little bit more detail, because I think there's a lot of interesting stories in there. So you studied in, did you say Otago?
Dunedin. Yeah.
Dunedin.
Yeah.
You studied architectural technology, or?
Yeah, architectural technology. It was the old version. So we were on the drawing board with the ink pens. Stencils were allowed if you couldn't write well. First week in study was how to write with an ink pen. That's all you did, was learn how to write, which I thought was weird and kind of fun and relaxing, because there was no pressure. You just had to write. And, a lot of my friends, they were studying law and accounting and, doctors. Dunedin is known for its professions in terms of study. And I'd come home from my studies and they'd be like, oh, what'd you do? And I was like, oh, I coloured in. And they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, I didn't even have to go between the lines. And in fact, I was encouraged to go outside the lines. And I just, enjoyed the fact that my studies was fun. I got to draw. I love to draw. And then Otago Polytech was one of the first campuses in the country to have a dedicated CAD department for building and architecture, which is why I chose that Polytech to study there. And Peter McDonald, I'm still friends with him. He was my tutor, and he was a great tutor and always encouraged us to kind of think outside the box. And we'd we'd be writing programs and automating stuff in CAD. I learned how to, write macros and Lisp and all sorts of stuff. And he was always coming over to our corner. He called us the old man's club, even though we were like in their 19s or young 20s or something like that. And we had this little group of people that kind of challenged each other to think outside the box, and we're making 3D models of stuff and just having far too much fun. I do remember the day that the dean came in and told us that we'd blown the entire year's budget for the arts and craft component. They'd bought air compressors and airbrushes so we could learn how to do airbrush paintings and level up watercolors.
Hey, that sounds like fun.
In the first month, we used the entire year's budget. I was... hopefully he's not listening to the recording when it's published, but we made T-shirts and all sorts of stuff for our friends. It was good fun.
Students do that kind of stuff. We managed to get so I studied architectural tech in the early 2000s, and it was the same. Our first year was still all drawing, even then. And then we started to introduce CAD in year 2, and then 3D CAD, which they called BIM, but it wasn't really in third year. But yeah, we got a hold of our lecturers' printing password, and so we were printing off big posters for our flats and all kinds of stuff. You don't think about this stuff when you're a teenager, but it sounds like even back then, the interest in digital was already starting to peak. Would that be fair to say?
That was all I wanted to do, was to draw with computers. After seeing that space shuttle, that 3D of the space shuttle, I was like, this is what I want to do. I don't want to do anything else. This is it. This is cool. And maybe that was influenced because I'm Gen X. I grew up watching Star Wars. I grew up watching Tron. All this kind of cool stuff. And then it was just like this chance to bring it to life. And then I think with some of the stuff that we did at Warren Amani, the HoloLens, and actually having holographic models, it's all Tony Stark kind of stuff. Like that's Hollywood stuff in real life, and taking that to a real construction site, showing the plumbers and the builders and the owner of a building what their future bathroom pod's going to be like and how complex it's going to be, and all of the complexities of getting the sewerage out of that room and out to the street was just mind-blowing. And a sad story was because they saw that digital prototype, they realized how hard it was going to be and how unviable it was going to retrofit the building, so it never went ahead. But at least they didn't start and spend millions of dollars building stuff only to find out that the plumbing won't fit and won't drain, which is typically what happens in construction. You kind of start and then you get to a point where, oh well, we're so far down the track, let's just finish it and make do with what we can.
Yeah, it's the think slow, act fast, but quite often people will act fast and then not realize the weight of the problems ahead of them.
And then we wonder why projects are over budget and behind schedule and stuff. And in this role, on the software development side of it, I've seen the same process unfolding, but with a different lens. Because it's all digital, it's very easy to undo, redo, and iterate. In construction, it's one and done. When the concrete's going in, and true story, there's a concrete pump just up the street. There's a new house being built, and they're pouring the concrete drive. And on the walk for lunch, I was looking at the guys, and they're still doing it the same way my dad was doing it 50 years ago.
Yeah.
It's amazing that there's so much change, but at the same time, there's so little.
Yeah, and then so you mentioned your first job, you took over your old tutor's job. That's an interesting kind of...
Yeah, that was wild. That's a wild story. Yeah, came in one day and he was like, oh, FYI, I'm leaving where I used to work, and I'm going to go full-time as a tutor. There's some people in this room that should apply for my job. And he kind of looked at the corner where these old man's club kind of hung out, and I pondered it for a bit, and I was like, oh, I don't know if I'm ready. I still had another year of study to go. And then I guess I plucked up the courage. I fashioned together a bit of a CV and put some 3D stuff in that and kind of printed it off and laminated it, sent it in, had an interview. Ken Warburton and Philip Heim, who I'm still friends with, still connected with. I met up with Ken in Wanaka. He lives in Wanaka. We had a chat, had a coffee, and talked about, what happened in 3 decades after leaving Warburton Architects. And it kind of blew his mind that, he sent me on this journey. I was keen to work for Warburton Architects because they were the only one in Dunedin that were really invested in CAD. Everybody had a computer, everybody had a CAD terminal and a drawing board. The drawing board was for the mistakes when the plotter made a mistake. So you inked it in instead of replotting it, because back then to plot a drawing, it took almost as long to draw it, really. They, watching the pen go across the tracing paper and hoping that it had enough ink in it that it was going to finish, and you had to stand there and make sure it didn't carry on plotting with no ink in it, which was just wild as well. Like, as a young graduate watching this machine, paid to watch this machine work. It's kind of surreal. I don't even think people these days know they're alive with some of the stuff that we used to do back then. And then, the old Diazo plan printer in a room full of ammonia, that was always fun. Kind of a good Friday afternoon printing, hundreds of drawings, and you come away and your hands are kind of like, they all feel funny, and you ride your bike home and that cleans out the lungs. Happy days.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because at the time it would have been revolutionary. It would have been an incredible advance in technology. So it's funny to think of it as antiquated. Now it was really the first real kickstart of automation, really, wasn't it?
State of the art. And Ken was always on the leading edge of digital. I remember when the internet came to Dunedin, and he was, should we get this? And I'm like, yeah, let's get into it. And sorry, Autodesk, I found a site where you could download everything. So I did. And then, learned all this stuff, and started building 3D models and animating things. I remember doing an animation of the Mosgiel new cycle track, modeled it all, put cycles on it, and I had all the wheels turning around and the pedals turning around, and they went around the track, and then it ended up on the TV. And I was like, wow, that's my model on the TV. And,
that's very cool.
There was a lot of crazy stuff that's been done over the years.
Yeah, it's funny. In that second year of uni, they didn't take us straight to 3D because they knew we would get distracted and go in the weeds, and we did. I figured out how to rotate our AutoCAD model and turn it into 3D, and next thing I'm literally extruding every stud in the wall because I can. And it's exactly what he feared.
I remember one of my fellow students at the Polytech, he started modeling the screws. I was like, whoa. you know.
Probably a couple of decades ahead there. All right, so you're working away in Dunedin. Your cat tragically passes away. I didn't know that story. What was your cat's name? Do you remember?
Yeah, Spike. Spike was a curious little cat. It was like Spike from the Gremlins. And he got run over one snowy night when we used to have snow in Dunedin. So it was kind of tragic, and that kind of kick-started a conversation about leaving the country and doing the OE. We had friends that had gone over. My brother had gone over, and I kind of was like, oh, this could be good fun. Let's give it a try. So packed up a backpack, jumped on a plane with the minimum cash you needed to get into the country. You had a minimum savings to buy your return ticket kind of thing. And flew to London with no plan, no idea, just winging it. And I found myself with multiple job offers on the first day, which I thought was just crazy and wild. And I ended up taking one with an architecture company that specialized in healthcare and laboratories. And I was like, well, this is pretty cool. And then jumped in there, leveraging that kind of digital expertise, and started writing, little macros and programs to automate stuff. Remember a crazy story, because you're on the other side of the world, you're trying to skive off and, visit the world, fill up your passport. That was the challenge. Who could fill up their passport the fastest? And I gave it a really good knock. I really did give it a good knock.
It's so cheap to travel too, right?
Oh, yeah. And Europe's an amazing, diverse country where every country you go through, they're stamping it. So you're just collecting stamps. That was the rite of passage. And I remember this crazy story. They're like, "Oh, Jason, you're really fast on this CAD stuff. Can you update these title blocks?" And I was like, "Oh, why do I have to do it? I'm doing the 3D model for a competition." And they're like, "Yeah, but we've estimated if we get somebody else, it's going to take like 3 weeks. And we only have 1 week to get it done. We reckon you'll get it done in a week." And I was like, "Oh, okay, all right." And it's like, it's updating title blocks, like, seriously. Can't we just get somebody else to do it? And I begged and pleaded to find somebody else, but no, I got the job. So I'd struck a deal with the boss, and I said, "Well, if I can get it done faster, could I get the rest of the week off? If because you've allowed the whole week, and if I just get it done, this is my job for the week. I could either take the week or get it done faster." And they're like, "Yeah, whatever." So I went away and I went back to my desk and started writing a wee program. And by lunchtime, I had written a program to automate it. And by afternoon tea, I'd run the program and all the drawings were up to date with all the right revisions on them, ready to go. So I didn't go back to the boss that day. I thought, no, I'll leave it for one more day and then I'll go back and see if I can cash in my, can I get the rest of the week off check? Went back to the boss and was like, "Hey, about that, can I get the week off if I finish early?" He's like, "Yes." And I'm like, "Are we good with that?" He's like, "You've done it, haven't you?" I was like, "No, I didn't say that. I was just like, are we good with that?" So we argued backwards and forwards for a bit, negotiating. And in the end, he made me fess up and say that I had done it. And he was like, "Yeah, well, you can go back and do that competition 3D model now." It's like, damn, I should have just played it cooler. Could have just sat at the desk. The internet was very primitive then. You couldn't just sit at your desk and surf the internet. You would just be sitting at your desk doing nothing. So I went back and got into the competition. I did get a good bonus at the end of the year, but I really wanted to go overseas and sit on a beach somewhere.
Yeah, just be in Barcelona by Tuesday. So
yeah, exactly.
This kind of programming background, so where did you learn to start writing your own little macros and programs and stuff? Was that university, or was that that was a self-interest?
Self-taught on the early internet. I stumbled across a bulletin board, and this goes to, I guess, my passion for helping others. And I've stumbled across a bulletin board, and there was a guy in America replied to me, and he's like, "Yeah, I'll help you." And I was like, wow. It's a guy on the other side of the world, doesn't know me from a bar or so, and he's giving his free time to help me learn how to write macros and Lisp. And Auto Lisp was a deep programming language back then. They're probably much more sophisticated ones these days. I haven't bothered to look again. And he helped me understand the syntax and write stuff. And I'd write stuff, and if it didn't work, I'd ping him a part of it, and he'd reply and say, "Oh, no, you've got the comma in the wrong place," or "No, you should use an if statement," or, "You've got too many if statements together. You should restructure it like this." So just kind of self-learned. And I sent him some chocolates from New Zealand as a thank you, which blew his mind. He had never had somebody send him something from the other side of the world. And I just took that forward, and I took that, I guess, pay it forward approach. He paid forward to me, and I guess that's why I started the Rugwell and a whole bunch of other things that I've done in my life over the years, just paid it forward.
Yeah, and you've also paid it forward in the sense that I know for a fact that I've been on Revit forums here and there trying to figure out the answer to something, and suddenly I'll find the answer I'm looking for, and then the username is you. I could have just gone across. I could have just gone across the office, but
yes,
you're helping people all around the world by answering the questions that they're having in the same way that these people helped you. So I think that's really awesome as well. So you did 2 major stints overseas while you were on the design side, didn't you?
Yeah, the UK, and then I went to Australia, kind of avoiding the GFC, the global financial crisis. Australia managed to skirt around that one. They had, gold, diamonds, lithium, all the rare earths of of the world just floating around on the ground over there. So they had their mining boom, and the iron ore going to China and for their construction boom, it meant that Australia could build and invest while the rest of the world was contracting and in recession, deep recession. So scarpered over there for a few years and led some really cool projects for some major architecture firms in Australia, and really kind of championing the BIM transition. So not just going from CAD to Revit, but taking Revit up a level. And again, that was something that I did. It started in Wellington, in New Zealand. Started with Archouse, and Dennis Burns and Mike Cole kind of jumping on the wagon with BIM and seeing it as a innovation that we could lead forward with. And then I took that overseas and leveled it up on much bigger projects. Yeah.
So you'd mentioned earlier a project with like a common shared environment. It was all in AutoCAD, but it was kind of a precursor of things to come. Was that during your first stint in
the UK?
The UK? Yeah. Was that at the same?
Actually, it started before that. So I first did it without realizing what I'd done for the Dunedin Moana swimming pool redevelopment project. The innovation came from necessity. I was the only guy in the CAD department. So it was just me doing the entire project, $50 million project. So I needed to find a really efficient way to maximize my effort. So I devised a method of XREFing everything. So the details were XREFed into the cross-sections. The cross-sections were XREFed at next level of scale, and everything was cascading XREFs. And for the uninitiated, it was incredibly complex. But for the initiated, you only had to change one detail or one drawing, and it rippled everywhere. And it was just this thing that I invented. Then when I went to the UK and met Mervyn Richards, he talked about the single model environment. I was like, I know this. I've seen this before. I did this on a project. And I didn't know there was like a concept around this, like a standard. And I was like, well, I can work with that. So I took that and took my workflows and applied them together for a small hospital. It was only about 300,000 square meters in the north of England, and was like, this is how we do it. And it went together swimmingly well. And many years later, I was back in the UK and I actually visited the hospital, and I felt like I was walking through what I already had been through, because we had started to model it in 3D, etc. as well, all way back then. And then I brought all of that, IP back to New Zealand for the regional prison development program, and led the digital for Spring Hill Prison. And we did that as a single model environment. Nothing was duplicated across the design team. There was a previous project where it was traditional. Everybody was working in their silos and they were having the traditional problems on site. Nothing fitting together because everybody worked in their silo. And when you layer them together on a construction site, you realize we're working to different schemes. So we laid it together in a digital context first, so we could do it right on site, and it went together incredibly well. And then as time progressed and the tools changed, I wanted to do it with the 3D, and I moved to Archouse because they were the country's kind of leading Revit practitioners, or people who were most on that innovative curve. So took that kind of concept, applied it with Revit, and we did the Willis Towers, or the Spark Towers project in Wellington that way. And we built the model to such a level of accuracy that it was manufactured from the model, including ordering pipework and bends and bolts and nuts from the manufacturer in Germany with a 1% margin of error, which is just unheard of in construction. And then, many years went by, tried it again, a couple of other projects. And I guess this is just kind of a repeating story. Every now and then you get the right ingredients together where you can really push the innovation, push the digital, push the collaboration to get a better outcome. And at Warren Amani, took all of those years, all those decades of knowledge, and leveled it up with Warren Amani Technologies. And I guess the crowning jewel in this story is the recently opened New Zealand Archives, where we leveled it up again. And to see that come to life with digital toolboxes and people using digital, contractors going to the digital toolbox to understand what they're going to install before they install it, is just fascinating and mind-blowing, and such a transformation. But out of all those years and all of those hundreds, probably thousands of projects, and count on two hands the ones that have gone down that other pathway, have gone down that 0.5% of being on time, on budget, into the quality expectations of the original brief, which is what drives me today. It is to shift that from 0.5% of projects in the world to maybe 10%. Even if it was just 10% of projects in the world had a better outcome, that would be phenomenal. And if you start to think about the climate impact of the construction industry, or just the financial impact of the construction industry, 13 trillion a year runs through the construction industry. And 99.5% of the projects are overtime and behind budget, behind program. So there's a massive amount of waste in that 13 trillion. If you just improve that by 10%, we could probably, I don't know, end world hunger just by getting rid of the waste. And that's not even a big step. It's estimated that the waste in the industry is anywhere from 20 to 30, if not more, percent. So
more in New Zealand. Yeah, for construction waste, it's nearly 50% of all waste in New Zealand. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's incredible. So, take that 13 trillion, you divide it by half. What would you do with 7 trillion of unwasted money? Maybe we could have world peace and save world hunger all at the same time.
You'd hope so. It depends who you ask. Some might just waste it somewhere else, but at least it's not in construction. Yeah, so let's get to that. So actually, before we get to your time at WAM, because I'm really keen to talk about a few key projects there. When did RTV Tools come about? That sort of something
that was 2007. LinkedIn tells me it's like 18 years ago, which I find mind-blowing. And we have an amazing global customer base from a concept that it kind of hit me one night. True story. I just met Rod Jury. He was the owner and the founder of Aftermail that week, and we hit it off in Wellington. And he was telling me about his how he got into building software and stuff, and how his dyslexic mind was always thinking about the future. I was like, wow, we're so alike. and I said to him, I've been thinking about doing an app to automate some of the stuff. And he's like, you should just do it, just start. I was like, actually, I might just do that. So I walked across the street and met my future business partner and said, hey, let's do this. This is going to be great. This is going to be fun. Convinced him to, and that was Simon DeFario. We started building this app, and we built this app to manage and print and export information out of Revit and control the revisions, because back then there was very basic controls in Revit, and we were one of the first. I think we were the first authorized Autodesk developer. That was us and Kiwi Codes back in the day. I actually went to school with Philip Miller, who was Kiwi Codes. It was hilarious that we're both these kind of nerdy guys from Gore building tools for Revit that ended up being these kind of global successes. I built stuff to automate stuff because I didn't want to be that guy 10 or 11 p.m. on a Friday night printing off the drawings. I was like, why is everyone else having fun mountain biking or fishing or down the pub, and I'm printing off drawings? Like, surely there must be a machine that can do this. And it kind of kickstarted a whole movement of getting the machines to do stuff. I used to start up the machines in that office that was with Stevenson and Turner back in the day. I used to start them up remotely from home, which used to freak people out if they were working late, because the whole office would start up at once and 50 machines would all turn on and they would go because they're all towers, desktops, and the fans would kick in, and they're like, "Oh, Jason's doing something again," and it was pretty fun. It was fun days.
Yeah, so you worked at quite a few places around Wellington, didn't you?
S&T and Arkhouse, and then I went to Oz, and I came back to Wellington with Warren and Money.
Yeah. So let's get into your time at WAM. So I joined there in 2010. You must have been about 2 years after me, and around 2012.
2014.
Oh, right. Was it that late?
Yeah.
Right. So the Justice Precinct was already well underway at that point. But I think
they were pouring the raft slab when I started.
Yeah.
And when I started, Peter Marshall, the boss, as I called him, he was like, "Hey, we've got this BIM execution plan. Do you know anything about it?" And I read it, and I was, "Peter, we need to have a conversation."
Yeah.
I don't think you understand what's in this BIM execution plan. And, one thing led to another as we're doing the transformation from 2D CAD to Revit with Warren and Money, and at the same time layering on the Christchurch rebuild and the inspiration and aspiration of New Zealand to, be a BIM first nation by leveraging the rebuild, which was such a pivotal moment in time. The BIMinNZ was founded out of that movement. Essentially the Revit user groups were like, "Hey, let's do something. Let's write something down. Let's have something bigger out of this." And the Auckland Revit user group, the Wellington Revit user group, the Christchurch one, and the Dunedin one kind of were like, "Let's get the right people in the room." And eventually the New Zealand BIM handbook was born out of that. And it was so cool to be involved in those user groups and involved in the various iterations of the New Zealand BIM handbook.
Yeah, that handbook is referenced. Actually, funnily enough, if you Google it or look it up on YouTube, there are people teaching the NZ BIM handbook in different languages. It's massive, and it was an awesome thing, and it's something that New Zealanders can own as well. And like you, be able to say that they contributed to that. It's not just 19650. It's our interpretation of things like that, but catered to the way we want to operate. And I think that's really unique and awesome.
And, when I was presenting to some customers in another country just recently and referencing the New Zealand BIM handbook as the practical approach. A lot of standards and guidelines are very aspirational and are trying to cover for every facet of potential use and leaves them open to multiple interpretations. And then the ultimate standard of wanting to get people on the same page starts to break down because now it's open to too many levels of interpretation. I think Kobe is a classic example of that. As a schema, it's a very broad schema. And you can ask for full Kobe or partial Kobe or anything in between. What the New Zealand BIM handbook did and set out to strive was not duplicate, but not reinvent, but to take the best of the best and assemble it in a practical manner that anybody could run a project and get a really good outcome out of. And I think that speaks volumes to that kind of Kiwi attitude of, hey, if it's not broke, don't fix it. But hey, if it's a little bit complicated and we can do it a wee bit more efficiently, we'll number 8 wire that one together and do that.
Yeah. I was chatting to Mel Tristram the other day, and I was telling her about when you actually handed me a physical copy of the NZ BIM, the NZ BIM handbook. And actually to have something like that that you could hold made it feel very real. And it's still, I was just saying to her, it's still on my shelf over there. I need to dig it out, but it's version 1, so it's a little outdated now, but I'm keeping it. Yeah. Hey, so tell me about the BIM cave on
the Justice Precinct.
Yeah.
Yeah, what a hoot. So, it was New Zealand's, first anchor project. It was the big lighthouse. Hey, this is Christchurch. And all eyes were watching it. And, it wouldn't be a month go by that there wasn't an official visiting site to see what we were creating there. And having been a foot in both camps, I was on Warren and Money on the design side, leading the digital adoption, but I was seconded to Fletcher Construction on the construction side. And so I had two different mandates. And any given day, I was one hat on, one hat off, another hat on. And I had to walk that tightrope of contractual responsibility to everybody. And out of it came the BIM cave, which was kind of a metaphor for just getting in the model. And the model surfaced in multiple places on that project. It came with me on a roadshow with the Oculus VR headset.
I remember.
Again,
I remember trying it for the first time.
Yeah, I was like, Peter, and not Peter Marshall this time, but Peter Halps. I convinced him to buy two of them from America. They were beta. He's like, what's this stuff? I'll just buy it. It would be great. And I'd trudge around with a laptop and a VR headset, and Supreme Court judges, High Court judges, ministers would put on, ministers' parliament put on the headset, and they'd walk through the Justice Precinct. And, it was a concrete slab, but they're walking through it, and they could see the High Court, and they could sit in their position and look out and see what they were going to see in terms of the judging room. It was what I learned with all of that was sight lines, and being able to see people's faces is very, very important in a court of law, and being able to give the judge his desk and his seat, and he could see what he was going to see long before it was built and approve it, was mind-blowing. And that was kind of this virtual BIM cave. And at some point I printed off a sign and stuck it on a container on site that said BIM cave, because inside the container was me and computers and servers and WYSIWYG things, and people would come to site, and they would go visit the BIM cave and put the HoloLens on, and we'd unpack the construction of the Justice Precinct and play different scenarios. I remember a story with one of the senior foremen when I first walked on site. He was like, "Oh, you and your shiny shoes and laptop, what are you going to do?" But within 3 months, he was the main user of the holographic view. He was in the VR, and he was like, "Turn that model upside down, turn that off, turn that on." And then he'd be back out on site and instructing people, this is how we build it. And I just love that. And we did all sorts of things. We prototyped things like underground tunnels and all sorts of stuff. That was amazing.
Must have been so validating to have one of your biggest critics become one of your biggest fans in such a short period of time.
It was pretty validating. But then, the real world kicks in, and sometimes a beam would be installed backwards, and you'd be like, how can I get that back around the right way? And, those kind of practicalities of things also kick in. And, sometimes what you design, you can't build it. And sometimes what you build is a bit different to what was designed. So, it's a balancing act.
Yeah, and I remember at this time, not long after you joined, we started going through a bit of a change management at WAM, where we were starting to really bring people into this new environment. And there were a couple of us. It was, I remember I got to swap with Nathan for 1 week. Nathan was your 2IC basically down in Christchurch.
Yes.
He came to Wellington for a week. I got to go to Christchurch for a week so that we could start to experience working with people we don't know. And that's when I got to visit the BIM cave and site for the first time with you. So that was always a memorable moment. We worked on a few other projects, and I think it was the Joint Food Science Facility.
Yes, it was too.
Was a project in Wellington. And that was the first time I remember, you might correct me if I'm wrong, but Revizto started to come onto the scene. There were two or three projects that were using it.
Yeah.
And it felt like it came out of nowhere. But obviously you must have seen something that resonated with you. Can you tell me about what it was about Revizto that kind of captured you and wanted you to start bringing it into these projects?
So what caught my eye was this integrated collaboration platform. Look, it's on the T-shirt. I didn't say that well. And it was that true integrated collaboration platform. It was the 2D and the 3D, the 2D contractual drawings together with the 3D model, and then the issue tracker, being able to track issues. And it really came from what I was doing on the Justice Precinct. I'd built my own issue tracker to track the Navisworks clashes. I built that in Jira, and that became.
I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah, that
you
became.
did.
That became its big own thing in its entirety as well. And as I was presenting at conferences around the world, I bumped into Armin, who is the founder and CEO of Revizto, and at one of the conferences, I saw a past colleague, Luke Johnson. He and I, Nathan, we all worked together at Woodhead in Australia. He was doing a presentation on Revizto and its application on the Royal Adelaide Hospital, INRA. And I was like, wow, that's exactly what I need. 3D model, the 2D drawings, and the issue tracker in one application. So I came back from that and I tried it on the Justice Precinct, tried to load the model and it fell over. So I wrote to I said, I'd love to use it, but this project's too big. It just won't load. I can't use it. So he said, well, leave it with me. We'll get our developers to look at it. And he came back in a very short space of time. He's like, here's another build. Can you try it? And I was like, oh, no, on that project anymore. I've moved on to another project. We'll have to wait for another project to come up. So I kind of waited for projects to come around to, apply the technology to. And it was the Otago Polytech was the first one on Revizto, and then the Joint Food Sciences came fairly shortly after it. And it was those early learnings on those smaller projects that we just kind of cascaded and rolled up for all of them after that. And then there was the Christchurch Convention Centre, Metro Sports, the Christchurch Stadium. It was just a wave of projects. And by the time I left Warren Amani and came to Revizto, it was 300 projects had been run through Revizto and 2 million issues had been identified and resolved, which when you think about that, if just one of those issues cost $10 to fix, if it hadn't been resolved in the design phase, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Because you and I know it's not $10 to fix an issue. It's not even $10 to look at an issue. It's like at a minimum, it's $100 to look at an issue.
Yeah, there were some early learnings from that were really fun to experience. It became, at the time I was toying with Unreal Engine as a way of getting projects into VR, and there were two programs. There was Revizto and then later Enscape that just made that a one-click button, which sort of reduced all the need to do it through a third party like Unreal. And then that first experience with everyone assigning issues to each other, I just remember the structural engineer and services engineer both at Becca and sit next to each other, and the structural engineer just assigned all of the issues to his services engineer counterpart. I said, structure can't move. It became a bit of a running joke watching him reassign everything to his mate whenever it came in. Yeah.
There's a lot of lessons learned, and I think what's neat about what we did here in New Zealand with all those lessons that were learned was we're sharing it across the broader community, whether it was at the BIM user groups or just through the projects that we worked on. And it's better for the industry if we can all work better together. There will be more projects, and with more projects, we've all got more jobs. Yeah,
and it was incredible just to see the industry grow so quickly, sort of between 2015 through to 2025, that decade, following the real kickstart of the Christchurch earthquake and the rebuild, and just the growing adoption of technology. I still think it's got a wee way to go, but we were starting to really see it happen, and that collaboration. I think it was a really special time to be in the industry, and actually to be a young person or in kind of the middle of your career, getting to experience all of this, but not being so absorbed in your day-to-day that you can't keep up with it.
Yeah. And how many times do people get to actually design or work on the construction of a new city in their lifetime. And I feel very privileged and honoured to have been in the role that I had at Warren to have touched so many projects, so many people through that period. It was very special, and I'm glad that I came back from Sydney and lived and worked through the rebuild on the ground in Christchurch, because it was a pretty desolate place after the earthquakes. It was pretty sobering to come back and see a city that I'd grown up and around and mountain biked through and stuff, just to see nothing. They were empty plots where buildings that I shopped in or eaten in or stayed in once before.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's going to be one of the great stories of the New Zealand construction industry, is just that growth around that rebuild. And the last of the Keystone projects is almost due to be complete with the stadium. So
and it was fun to have worked on and touched that one as well. And I know lots of stuff about the details of its foundations, which I know for most people probably don't care. But they're pretty big and they're full of steel. And for the people that made it, it'll be a special moment when it opens.
Yeah, I think the people listening to this probably care quite a lot, but that's our audience. So, all right, so worked on some major projects, grew a lot of amazing people and a lot of new innovations, and then ultimately at some point moved back to Australia and joined Revizto. And now you're in a position where you get to see the world again. What was that like?
Wild. For many months, I was still pinching myself. I kind of felt like I might have been run over by a bus on my mountain bike. And I was just living through a dream, because I didn't think that would happen. And, when I think about how it kind of transpired, going back to Australia was a pretty heavy moment for our family. We were heading back there to look after someone who was terminally ill. They're not with us anymore. And that kind of kickstarted me thinking about a whole bunch of stuff of, what do you want to do in life? And one thing led to another, and I ended up at Revizto, and very privileged to be in this role and to share my experiences with the world and see other projects, and to touch in a very small way these projects around the world. And in London in the last couple of weeks, it was very validating when a key customer talks about, for them, one of their special moments was meeting me and getting validation that the ideas and the concepts that they were trying to achieve in their project were heading in the right direction. And I feel really privileged to share that with people around the world. And I think that's one of those kind of proud moments where all of that hard work, all of those, late nights, weekends, seems like it's come full circle when people appreciate it.
Yeah, that must be really special.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that you're quite proud of how New Zealand and Australia kind of punch above their weight. Is there anything that you're seeing in the Northern Hemisphere or the other side of the world that you think New Zealand and Australia could really adopt in order to keep that growth going? Is there anything that jumps to mind?
That's a really interesting question, because there's two ways of answering it. Because there's some things that are happening on the other side of the world around new technologies, AI, and bits and pieces, and you could be like, deeper investment in digital. But I think for our region, the biggest thing, the biggest takeaway that we can take away is keep being ourselves, keep being those curious, collaborative minds that is our construction industry. It's not necessarily about having the next sparkly digital thing. It's about having those curious minds coming together to solve the real world problems, and the tools that we use just be the tools that we use.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. It's good. It's validating, right? That you feel like you're going in the right direction. How you, what do you think about New Zealand sort of catching up with Australia in the way that contractors and the design team are starting to work more collaboratively on new types of contracts?
I think that's our secret sauce in this part of the world. As I've traveled the world, it's still very adverse. It's either traditional or it's design build. It's not this collaborative, almost collegiate way of bringing together a building. Designers can learn a lot from builders, and builders can learn a lot by understanding the design. And when you come together in that early contractor involvement, or whatever you want to call it, PPP, IBD, CCZ. There's been so many acronyms for just people coming together and collaborating on a common goal, which is the project. And maybe that's the work that we need to do over the next 5 years for the remainder of this decade is to work on softening all of the acronyms and jargon that just confuses people, because really it's people coming together, understanding each other's needs, desires, benefits, challenges, and workshopping a clear pathway forward that is beneficial to all the stakeholders. And the stakeholders are the owner, the client, the design team, and the construction team. They are the stakeholders. And when you come together, you create magic. And Archives is a testament to that. It is a fascinating building. It's a building that moves 3 meters in any direction. You don't do buildings like that anywhere in the world. And when people ask me about, what have you worked on, and I mention a building that moves 3 meters in any direction, people go, "What? A building that moves?" People just can't get their heads around that. So it's fascinating that such a complex, unique facility can go together like clockwork. But it was all about the collaboration that was fostered through that project.
Yeah, and it's if I'm not mistaken, it's probably New Zealand's leading example of a digital twin for a vertical building as well. I know that digital twins quite common in horizontal infrastructure, things like dams and stuff, but I haven't seen any other examples.
Well, not in my experience. I think a lot of people kind of call a 3D model a digital twin. Again, it's the jargon thing.
Yeah.
The Archives project and the true digital twin that's on that project is world leading, and it's very, very sophisticated. I know the people behind the software, and they say that there's not an installation of their software that is comparable to Archives. It stands head and shoulders above the world.
Yeah. Again, another thing for New Zealand to be proud of.
Yeah.
You mentioned something that made me laugh, just all of the jargon and all of the acronyms that we're hell-bent on keeping. In my new role teaching digital first construction, can you imagine what it's like for an 18-year-old to come in and their first year is just learning acronyms?
Yeah, it'd be like learning to write with an ink pen for the digital.
Yeah, it's almost like learning a new language. It's funny. I was just there's all these different contracts, and they're all just a combination of 3 letters, and it's a lot. AI. I wanted to talk to you about AI for a moment. And I'll share a little anecdote so the audience understands where we're coming from here. You've always been a real strong advocate for it in our time that we worked together. I'm naturally a cynic, as you probably remember. I tend to look for the problems in something that looks too good to be true. And it was never adversarial, but we had a little bit of back and forth where you're like, "It's amazing. Look at what it can do." And my response was, is it good though? I appreciate that it's impressive, but is it what it's producing good? And I remember this example of a short video. Everything's made by AI. The art, the animation, the music, the whole thing. And at the time it was like Will Smith eating spaghetti. And I was looking at it in the context of what it looks like right now and thinking, well, yeah, it's cool that you can do this, but I don't think this is very good. you were seeing it from a different perspective. You were really seeing what it would become.
Yes.
And it's interesting to have this conversation to reflect back on that now, because I'm sure if you created that same little 30-second video, it would be completely different.
No, it has been recreated, and you can.
Is it?
Yeah, you can actually Google it. You can Google Will Smith meme spaghetti, and it'll show you
yeah.
And it'll show you it done today with today's technology, and it is Hollywood quality, and it actually looks like Will Smith eating spaghetti. It's not like this kind of quasi cartoon.
I've seen those side by side. There was like a little short like Terminator video that I think you showed me.
Yeah.
And that was what I was referring to. But so the root of what I'm trying to ask here is that you've got a real knack for seeing technology in its infancy, whether it's like Blender or whether it's AI or whether it's Revizto, for instance, or whatever it is, RTV tools, and being able to visualize what it'll become. And I'm just keen to ask you how do you assess and sorry, I'm just trying to find the right words for it. How do you know?
That's a really good question. I get asked that from time to time. I don't know. I just don't know. I don't have a scientific approach to it. I'll look at it. I'll pull it apart, reassemble it. I'll poke at it, and then I'll imagine. I let my mind just imagine a world with this new thing in it and all of the possibilities in it. I think that's my ultimate gift. And my mind runs away really fast. And I can see all of the dominoes starting to fall, and I can see the outcome. And then I talk about that outcome, and I get really excited about it. And then I forget that sometimes people need to catch that outcome, and they haven't seen all the dominoes. And I'll be at the end of the chain, and people I'm talking with are at the front going, "Don't get it, Jason. What are you on about?" And I'm like, I forget that I've just missed the big gap in the middle that rattled through my head in a split second. And that's been a challenge I've been working on for years. I put that down to my dyslexic DNA, and I've seen it in my boys as they've grown up as well. It's a challenge. You just got to work on it. You get these kind of gifts, and what do they say? There's a saying, God doesn't give with two hands. So you get a gift, and there's always a negative with that gift. I guess the negative is forgetting that nobody else can see what you're seeing, and you just get really excited about it. And, AI is amazing where it is today. There's probably not a day that goes by that I haven't used it for something. But it goes back to that old adage, shit in, shit out. AI, CAD, Revit, BIM, all of these digital tools, even the printing press, if you put shit in, it just amplifies the shit. But if you put good stuff in, it amplifies the good stuff, and AI is doing that. I do foresee a world in the future that's coming exponentially, so I don't know the timeline. The timeline is always shorter in some instances, but longer in others. The construction industry is that kind of paradox where you can see how this thing can be applied into the industry, and you're like, yes, in the next 5 years. I remember telling someone, he's not with us anymore, 20 years ago, actually. BIM will be the norm in 5 years. Well, here we are 20 years later, and it's so not the norm. Sometimes you think, this is going to be the norm, and everybody's going to be doing it, and I'll be out of a job. But at the same time, the world's a big place, and it takes a lot of things to move things forward. And I think we've seen that with the EVs. I think people were thinking everybody was going to be driving EVs by 2030 and climate change would be fixed. And I do remember having a good discussion with Dr. Emily around that's probably not going to happen. I think we're going to blast through 2030 and not even made a dent in any of the targets, and then go, problem. And, I went down that rabbit hole and looked at that, had a good conversation with AI about that problem. And And, we'll keep that to myself because it's a pretty dark rabbit hole, that one. How will this all come together? I'm very interested in the humanoid robotics and how it's advancing. What I'm very interested in is how software is being trained to train the robots. That's really cool. I don't know if people realize that there are people employed to wear VR headgear and motion capture head suits to just train the robots to do whatever they're doing, whether it's frying an egg or, I don't know, cutting a piece of wood. There's somebody off screen, out of camera shot, that's in the VR suit showing the robot what to do, and they're learning how to do that. NVIDIA are taking that into the virtual environment, and they're gamifying all of that stuff. So it's going to be an interesting time the next 20 years. Will we see robots on construction sites? I think we will. There's a skill shortage that we're trying to solve. That's why they're coming. They're not coming because we just want to automate things. They're coming because there's skill shortage. If you've got, my dad used to say it all the time. He always wished he could put old heads on young shoulders. And this is what this technology is going to provide, is a pathway to put old heads on young shoulders. And the young shoulders being a machine that never gets old. And, if they fall downstairs, who cares? It's just a machine. Get another one. Or fix it. When people fall downstairs, that's a big problem. And I do think, looking at the guys just up the street that were pouring that concrete, maybe robots should do that. And people can do something different, but we'll see what happens. Because I see the videos of robots installing Gibboard, and you just laugh at how inefficient it is and how much of a mess they make, and the waste that they would increase. Maybe this is the scary thing with robots in construction. Maybe the waste goes up. A true story. I remember a time when Xerox was selling me the latest, greatest photocopier printer to move away from that diesel ammonia-fueled printer. And they're like, you can just print them like this and you'll use less paper and you'll use less toner and you'll use less. That was how they sold it. But we produce more paper and we produce more waste.
You're printing more.
Because I took the waste to the dump. I had a really good fun time driving the Alfa Romeo to the dump, which was really cool when you're really young, full of rubbish bags. But we didn't print the paper just to take the dump. It became a habit. Oh, we'll just print that off. I'll have a look at the latest thing, as opposed to looking at it on screen or looking at it on the drawing board. When you were on the drawing board, you were deliberate with what you put on the tracing paper, because the last thing you wanted to do was scratch it out and make that change, because you got anywhere between 2 or 3 goes at scratching something out before you put a hole in the paper. And then you're up for redoing the entire thing. So you thought about everything before you did it. And then I watched CAD. I took that thinking into CAD and amplified the thinking with CAD, BIM, and those workflows. But as I watched the generations come behind me, they were just Control Z, Control V. It was undo, redo, undo, redo. Yeah. In fact, I remember watching someone, a friend of mine, and he did like 20 commands like super fast. 15 of them were undo. And I was like, why didn't you just do the 2 commands? Why didn't you just slow down and do the 2 commands?
Really considered commands, yeah.
And, I think that's the world we live in, print it and throw it away. Print it again, throw it away.
Unfortunately. I'm glad you touched on robotics, because I was going to ask you about that. I'm quite bullish on robotics, and that's partially just because, being on the education side now, I've seen how students are using robotics. The biggest barrier to using robotics for young people was programming them, but visual scripting like Grasshopper and Dynamo and tools like that have completely lowered that barrier now, that basically any master's student can program a robot to do stuff. Now, and these aren't intelligent robots. These are robots that you give instructions like the 6-axis and things like that. But we've seen how fast technology moves. So I think that with the main barrier removed and new tools like AI to help code, you will start to see an uptick. I think the biggest barrier now becomes cost. But hopefully as adoption
as
increases,
well.
cost decreases. Yeah.
Yeah. And, that's the exciting nexus that we're at, particularly with AI filling that void for the programming side of it, and really lowering the barrier to entry. And it's going to come back to the creative applications that I think people are really good at doing. The people who see the gaps between things and go, oh, I can fill that. And they're going to be able to work with an AI agent as their digital assistant. And I was watching a thing last night on Clawbot. I think it's Clawbot. So it's Claude as a bot that works in a standalone kind of computer assistant way, and you can just deploy it to a very simple computer, and you give it its own parameters, its own life, its own email account, and it becomes your virtual assistant, and you just talk with Clawbot and it does the work for you.
Interesting. I haven't seen that one. I have to look it up, and I need to look up that rocket that you referenced at the very beginning to understand where this all started.
Yes. Space Shuttle Columbia, if I remember right.
Yeah, I'll check it out. I want to start to wrap up because I know you're busy, but I've just got a couple of last minute questions. This one's kind of a big one, but when you look back at your career, is there anything in particular you're really proud of? Is there a standout moment?
Oh, honestly, there's been so many, but if I was to boil it down to one, it's watching the people I've touched go on and do something that they never thought they would do. And there's been a lot of people in that bucket, but I think the one that stands out was Chris at Warranamani. He came from on-site as a labourer to Warranamani. I saw potential in him, and we got him building some door families, and then he became part of the Warranamani Technologies advanced BIM team. And before he left Warranamani, he was like, I didn't think I could ever do any of this. I just thought I was going to be labourer on site. I was like, Chris, you're so much more than that. You're curious, you've got a great mind. I just pushed you in the right direction. And watching many people go on that kind of journey is probably my proudest moment, is giving people just a little nudge and watching them go.
Oh, that's awesome. And yeah, I loved working with Chris. I want to get him on here at some point because he's got some fun stories as well. That segues really well into my last question. You've always been a really amazing mentor, and you always put a lot of time and energy into the people around you, and I can attest to that personally. What advice would you give to people that are maybe just entering the industry or thinking about what they want to do? What advice would you give them to maybe set them in the right direction?
Oh, be curious. It would be the ultimate kind of piece of advice. The other piece would be, don't rush it. This industry is amazing, and allow it to wash over you. Don't try and force it. Don't rush it. I remember being asked, that typical thing in a performance review, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I remember the person who was my boss at the time saying, oh, that doesn't sound like a 5-year view. That sounds like a 10 or a 15-year view. And I kind of felt deflated at that because I could see it. I was like, yes, but you got to do it. But, in hindsight, I'm a bit older, a bit wiser. Allow the moments to wash over you. Because as you do rush through things, you can miss the moments, and those moments are special.
Yeah, great. Awesome advice. Jason, it's awesome being able to have a long form chat with you again. It's been a long time, and it almost feels like we're working together again, which is interesting in its own right. I could talk to you all day, but I know that you're busy, and I really appreciate your time. So thank you so much for giving your time and sharing your story with our audience. And to the audience out there, thank you so much for listening. Until next time, goodbye.
Ciao.